Judiciary Committee Subcommittee on Crime is called to order. We thank all of you for being here. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley.
Please join me in saluting our nation's flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Kiley, and thank each of you. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We welcome everyone to today's hearing on victims of violent crime in the District of Columbia. Without objection, the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, will be able to participate in today's hearing to question witnesses if a member yields her time for that purpose. We're grateful to have Ms. Norton visiting with us today. Thank you. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. We welcome again each of you to our hearing today in the nation's capital. We especially thank all of our witnesses. We're grateful to have you here. The crime we are witnessing just a few blocks from this building is unprecedented. No section of the city can be considered safe anymore, and the man who is in charge of prosecuting the criminals has abandoned his responsibilities, and that's Matthew Graves, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, who was appointed by President Joe Biden. He is failing to prosecute criminals. His office has consistently declined to prosecute criminals in the district. In 2021, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia opted against prosecuting 67% of arrests presented in the D.C. Superior Court. To provide context, out of the 15,315 arrests made in D.C., 10,261 did not lead to prosecution. In comparison, in 2015, USAODC only declined to prosecute 35% of cases, which suggests that the office under Graves' leadership is failing to prosecute crimes and protect the public. In just a few short years, the city went from having 65% of cases prosecuted to having 65% of cases dropped, a complete reversal that has had a catastrophic impact on public safety. Mr. Graves has indicated that the type of cases he is refusing to prosecute are primarily illegal gun possession and illegal drug possession cases. Without fail, we can anticipate that my Democrat colleagues will call for more gun control, but President Biden's hand-picked prosecutor for Washington, D.C. refuses to enforce gun laws already on the books. Violent crime rates in Washington, D.C. have seen a significant spike this year. Just last week, the district surpassed 200 homicides, the quickest the district has hit this mark at this point in the year this century. As of October 3rd, 2023, violent crime is up 38% from the same time last year. For example, as of October 4th, 2023, MPD data shows 750 reported carjackings, of which an alarming 75% involved weapons. However, there have only been 113 arrests for carjackings this year, with juveniles responsible for an astonishing 65% of those carjackings. Additionally, as of October 4th, year-to-date statistics for 2023 reveal 216 homicides, 123 cases of sexual abuse, 2,656 robberies, and 1,110 assaults involving dangerous weapons. As of October 4th, 2023, the district has witnessed 4,105 violent crimes and 21,980 property crimes. The criminals know they will not be prosecuted by U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves. But Matthew Graves is not the only one soft on criminals in Washington, D.C. City leadership slashed the Metropolitan Police Department budget by roughly $15 million in 2021. And Washington, D.C. City Council has passed laws that embolden criminals and hamstring the police. In November 2022, the D.C. City Council voted unanimously on a bill to overhaul the criminal code, which reduced the maximum sentence for almost all violent crimes and eliminated mandatory minimums for all crimes except first-degree murder. That proposal was vetoed by the mayor, which was later unanimously overridden. The bill was so radical that bipartisan majorities in both the House and Senate passed a resolution to prohibit it from becoming law, and President Biden signed it. In the wake of the May 2020 murder of George Floyd, the district's city council passed police reform legislation that radically changed policing in the district. Unfortunately, city leadership has not always supported law enforcement, and that shows up in recruiting and failure to retain officers who they've spent money training and have simply been let go. Today we'll hear from a former assistant U.S. attorney, an MPD detective, and victims of crime about ways to make this city safe again. At this time, I have two articles that I'm going to enter into the record. One called "The D.C. City Council Failed at Criminal Justice Reform, Congress Must Fix It," and another called "The Blue City Murder Problem." Those will be admitted to the record without objection. Seeing none. I'm going to show a short video.
2023 is on track to be one of the deadliest D.C. has seen in decades.
There have now been 200 homicides so far this year in the district.
The district is in a state of emergency due to the high crime rate.
So far in 2023, 12 children have been shot and killed.
The murder rate in the District of Columbia is skyrocketing.
Crime on D.C. public transit has jumped to horrific rate.
All crime up 25%, murder up 24%, motor vehicle theft up 107%.
A violent weekend unfolding in the district.
2023 is now the third year in a row where D.C. has reached 200 homicides.
Police are investigating a series of shootings that includes a mass shooting.
16-year-old was shot and killed, and then bullets went flying into 2 classrooms.
8 people shot and killed in the district in just 72 hours.
The triple shooting in Shaw. 2 women are dead and a teenage girl is in the hospital.
Some neighborhoods have seen homicides increase 280%.
The vast majority of them are just fine.
I thank again the witnesses for being here. I look forward to your testimony. We appreciate you being here, and all in the audience and the members of the committee being here. I yield and now recognize the gentle lady from Texas, the ranking member, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for your courtesies, and thank you to my colleagues that are here, Ranking Member Nadler, Congresswoman McBath, Congresswoman Dean, and we are pleased that the District of Columbia Representative Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton is present today. Make as many efforts to hear her voice. Let me be very clear. We're in the midst of disarray. We have no speaker. And for those of you who watch Democrats come in, we're in a very serious caucus meeting, which is our responsibility. So please forgive us for any short delay that you may have seen. It is no offense intended. And the first thing I want to say is to those who've been victims of crime, that there is no greater responsibility for those of us in Congress, or those of us in local government, those of us who will lead cities, and those of us who lead cities, to realize that our people, the people there, are our greatest responsibilities. I want to be a problem solver and a crime fighter. And so, having lived here even before I was a member of Congress and enjoyed the blessings of being a resident of the District of Columbia or working in the District of Columbia, I can assure you I have a great affection for this city, separate and apart of its historic responsibility or role as the capital of the United States, which I tell all of my elementary school children about how important Washington is. But I do want to say that we need to be serious about what has happened to you as a victim. And my colleagues seem to want to exaggerate not your injury and the fear, but the idea that we were also attacked on January 6, 2021, when there were no voices from my friends on the other side of the aisle about the violence that came to the city, and no interest in voting for the commission that we were trying to put forward. So I want to make sure that when this hearing gets through that we have solutions for you, and that we either work with federal funds, which I know that your member is working on. But as I do so, let me be very clear, this is a challenging moment. We embrace our victims. We want them to be, in essence, never victims again, but protected in the status that they're in. But in the record, I must place that 10 cities that employed the most police officers per capita in 2022 Washington, D.C., 542.91 per 100,000. Doesn't need residents. Doesn't mean not more are needed. It means we need to work together. The 10 cities that spent the most on policing per resident in 2022, Washington, D.C., number one, $751.62 per person. So we need to find a way to get to the core of the violence, the violent criminals off the street. This uptick in crime is concerning, not only for the residents who call this city home, especially in the areas of the city that bear the brunt of the most violence, but also for the millions of visitors who come to experience its rich history, culture, its warmth, and important political institutions. That's why I hope we will have a genuine discussion today that focuses on solutions. We can't win by finger pointing. We are in the midst of finger pointing now, and we have no speaker. It is essential that Congress prioritize the safety and security of those who live, work, and visit the district by ensuring that federal government, we must do our part. And I am a big believer in federal resources matching local resources for your safety. The District of Columbia is unique in many ways, and one of them is the complex relationship it shares with the federal government. While its status as the nation's capital brings many benefits, it also brings many challenges. We're in here every day as guests, but we also create an extra financial burden. In combating violent crime, the District of Columbia has taken a multifaceted approach that includes passing emergency legislation supported by the mayor that filled in gaps in pretrial detention procedures for violent criminals. You're holding more of these criminals now, bolstering law enforcement programs and recruitment, implementing community policing initiatives, and instituting a juvenile curfew in certain hotspots. And we know that we have to work with juveniles. We know they're in the midst of juveniles going forward into the 20s, are those who are in the mix, and those in the late 20s are the ones with mostly the gun violent incidences. We understand that. So enhancing the use of technology such as CCTV cameras to combat crime. Additionally, the district has focused on crime prevention strategies such as increased investment in youth programs, education, job opportunities for at-risk individuals. It doesn't help you to say that there is a crime wave across America. Every city has to take responsibility, and I realize that because people are in pain. But the district's response to any type of crime, whether violent or not, can be complicated by overlapping jurisdictions and responsibilities between local and federal law enforcement. I want to find a smoother way of finding that common ground that they can work together along with your distinguished member of Congress. We know that the federal government's presence in the district, while providing unique opportunities for collaboration, also creates challenges. We want to, for instance, despite the obvious needs for agencies from both governments to work together and share information vital to public safety, like the identity of an individual suspected of committing multiple robberies, communication between the two agencies or entities can be stymied by legal red tape. Let's stop that. That's why it's crucial for Congress to ensure coordination and communication among the multiple agencies that possess jurisdiction over different areas of the criminal justice system. I hope our witnesses today will offer solutions, establish greater coordination and cooperation between the local and federal law enforcement. We must also consider the resources required to combat violent crime. Get violent criminals off the street is what we all should collectively want to do. Wraparound services and helping those who can get out of the criminal mindset, get them away from this and you don't see them again. Let's not eliminate that opportunity. Let's deal with mental health services that may also be engaged. Both the local and federal governments must continue to allocate sufficient funding, investment, resources for law enforcement agencies, crime prevention programs, community initiatives, and as they perceive, the local government, the needs for additional law enforcement officers. Public safety. Helping to strengthen these vital institutions will support the district's ability to address the underlying causes of violent crime. I spoke with the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Matthew Graves, who lives in the district, loves this city, and will have the same impact on him as any other person that may be subject to the acts of a violent criminal. He is using every tool that he has available to address violent crime, including carjackings, robberies, as well as a flow of illegal guns in the city from states from Virginia and Georgia. I did not hold up on the inquisition that I gave of him yesterday in a very lengthy conversation. He assured me that they are at a point where 90% of the individuals arrested for the most serious violent crimes, which are homicide, carjacking, rape, and assault with intent to kill are being prosecuted. You also noted that a significant decrease in number of cases that his office chooses not to prosecute after inheriting a decline rate of 70%. He is working to get rid of that number and to prosecute cases. So there is a stitching together and a work, but we must do a lot to help move forward the crime lab, get it on its feet, and get it where it is moving cases forward. We can be helpful in that, and I hope the Congresswoman will allow us to be helpful or to instruct us how best to do that. As Democrats continue to offer solution after solution to make all American communities safer to work, it is important that we rid the streets of illegal firearms. Let's not make light of that. Hold offenders accountable, address the root causes of violence, such as poverty and housing instability and addiction. And Republicans have yet to join us on all of these issues. We can't just point the finger. We've got to work on all of them. The surge in violent crime in the district is a problem. I want to hug every victim, but I would like to say, I don't want you to be a victim. I don't want victims in Houston, Texas. I want to make sure that we get to this point where we live safely in the nation and in our communities, so we can establish stronger partnerships, sharing information, and as well, making sure that we are together as not only Washingtonians, that we are now, but as Americans. Mr. Chairman, I'm yielding a second to Congressman Eleanor Holmes Norton. I'm yielding you a moment just to comment on the record. You're going to yield to her? All right.
She will be yielded. Time.
She'll be yielded. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member Nadler. By establishing this ability to work together, my goal here is to sit here and listen to you with respect, and my mind will be calculating how we continue to work with you, your mayor, your law enforcement, your Washingtonians, your excellent member of Congress, and the federal government to do what we're supposed to do, which is to ensure the national safety of the American people. With that, I yield.
Thank the gentlelady. Without objection, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Ivey, will be able to participate in today's hearing to question witnesses if a member yields him time for that purpose. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Jordan, for his opening statement.
I thank the chairman. Crime is out of control, and everybody knows it. More importantly, everybody knows why. When you defund the police and you have prosecutors who go soft on crime, you get more crime. This doesn't take a genius to figure this out. We've done field hearings in New York, field hearings in Chicago. Everybody tells us the same thing. And frankly, when you disparage the good men and women who put on the uniform, risk their life every day in our streets, you also get a shortage of police officers and more crime. Never forget, bad guys aren't stupid, they're just bad. If they know there are less police on the street to stop them and they're not going to get prosecuted if they do get caught, they do bad things. That's what we all got to understand. This is as basic as it gets. So I want to thank our witnesses for being here. Thank the chairman for this hearing. We have heard this in New York and Chicago, and we're going to other cities. We have to change this. And we have to begin to say to our law enforcement, thank you. Thank you for doing a tough job. That's what's at stake here. Mr. Chairman, I thank you again for this hearing and our witnesses for being here today, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Mr. Chairman for yielding back. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Nadler, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, no one should be afraid in their own community. No one should be afraid to walk to school, to go to their neighborhood park, or to drive home to their families after a long day at work. We all share a commitment to protecting our communities, and I want to thank our impacted witnesses for appearing today and for sharing their stories. The COVID-19 pandemic destabilized many communities nationwide, exacerbating root causes of violent crime like poverty and joblessness. And it left many of our young people without the daily structure and mentors to help them succeed. While some cities have largely recovered from the effects of the pandemic, Washington, D.C. still has more work to do to improve public safety. But make no mistake, our Republican colleagues have not called this hearing to help D.C. solve problems. They were not looking to solve problems when they called a hearing on victims of violent crime in Manhattan just 2 weeks after its district attorney charged President Trump with multiple felonies. They were not looking to solve problems when they held a roundtable in Chicago mere days before a potential government shutdown. And so too today, as Republicans struggle to elect a new speaker, sending the House spiraling into new depths of chaos and dysfunction, this hearing is yet another attempt to distract and mislead the American people. We won't fall for it. The Republican majority offers no policy solutions that would actually protect residents of Washington, D.C., or other big cities. Instead, they seek only to flood these cities with more guns, while they work against meaningful legislation to invest in our communities and support proven public safety measures. Remember that under Democratic control, the House passed the Victim Act, legislation that would provide $100 million a year to law enforcement to help solve homicides. But 178 Republicans voted against it. That's 178 Republican members who opposed the bill to help prosecute murderers. 55 Republicans opposed the Invest to Protect Act, a bill that would have authorized $300 million in grants for law enforcement agencies with fewer than 125 officers. And now that Republicans are in the majority, not only have we not taken any of these bills back up, but they are actually looking to cut funding for dozens of critical grants and government services that support state and local law enforcement. How exactly is this supposed to protect victims of violent crime in Washington, D.C.? Meanwhile, D.C. has the highest per capita spending on police in the country. D.C. also has the largest per capita police force, the most officers per resident of any city in the country. So D.C. is investing in law enforcement, and it will keep investing in law enforcement, but Democrats know that this is just part of the answer. For law enforcement to be effective, it also has to have the trust of the community it serves. Officers have to be able to get tips from community members to solve crimes. That's why we supported the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act to fund training, promote accountability, and strengthen public trust. 212 House Republicans, that is to say all of them at the time, voted against it. And now communities have fewer homicides when there are fewer illegal guns. That's why we established a federal crime for gun trafficking and straw purchasing in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. It became law over the objections of 193 Republicans who voted against it. And crime prevention is about much more than law enforcement. That's why we passed the Break the Cycle of Violence Act to invest in community violence intervention and job training programs for 16 to 24-year-olds. 207 Republicans voted against it. Time and time again, Democrats have put forth comprehensive public safety solutions that fund law enforcement, support community partners, provide job opportunities, and combat gun trafficking. Republicans have opposed these efforts over and over, instead offering hearing after hearing that serve as nothing more than a press release. These political stunts are not a solution, but they are all Republicans have to offer. And don't forget that when a violent mob of right-wing extremists stormed the Capitol on January 6th, following encouragement from Donald Trump, few of our Republican colleagues were worried about violent crime in D.C. on that day. When that mob beat police officers, including both Capitol Police and the D.C. Metropolitan Police who came to provide support, many of our Republican colleagues downplayed the brutality that these officers faced. And when Speaker Pelosi brought forth a bill to honor the Capitol Police and the D.C. Police with congressional gold medals, 21 Republicans, including members of this committee, voted against it. Finally, I wanted to address a statistic that came up in a different hearing that Republicans in the Oversight Committee held, which was also intended to beat up on D.C., and also came up in the chairman's opening statement this morning. They attacked U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Matthew Graves, for declining to charge 67% of the arrestees referred to his office in fiscal year 2022, implying that he is soft on crime. But what they didn't mention is that the rate of charges for the most serious violent crimes is much higher. In fact, it is 90%. Their misleading statistic also ignores the fact that some cases are not resulting in charges because there simply isn't enough evidence at the time of arrest to support a charge. The U.S. Attorney's Office continues to investigate these cases and may bring charges later, but those charges are not reflected in that misleading statistic. Further, some charges are not pursued because the victim simply does not want to press charges, and the government does not have enough evidence to proceed without the victim's testimony. In any case, the U.S. Attorney is a federal official, and if we want him to do more, we can give him more resources. But that would require real action from a Republican majority that cannot even manage the basic functions of government, and that appears more interested in defunding the FBI, the ATF, and other federal law enforcement agencies than in offering solutions to communities that need our help. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about how the many solutions the Democrats have offered can improve public safety in D.C. and across our nation. Unlike our colleagues, we are ready to act. I yield back.
Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. I will now introduce today's witnesses. Detective Greg Pemberton, thank you for being here. Mr. Pemberton is a retired D.C. Metropolitan Police Department detective who serves as the chairman of the D.C. Police Union. He represents more than 3,600 officers and has testified before Congress previously about the challenges that police officers face on the job. Are you not retired?
I'm an active duty detective, sir. Thank you.
Well, maybe I got that wrong. I think I did get that wrong. I apologize.
I'll take you up on being retired.
Sorry. I apologize, Detective. Mr. Gaynor Jablonski is the owner of the Valor Brew Pub, a veterans-focused bar in Washington, D.C. On June 29, 2023, he was attacked inside his business while his 4-year-old son was present. The assailant pointed a gun at Mr. Jablonski and his son. D.C. prosecutors offered the assailant a plea deal and released him pending sentencing. Mr. Mitchell Sobolewski. Mr. Sobolewski was robbed at gunpoint in Washington, D.C. His assailant subsequently had his sentence reduced and went on to rob 2 additional people. Mr. Charles Cully Stimson is the Deputy Director of the Edwin Meese Center at the Heritage Foundation. His work focuses on criminal law and drug control policy, as well as issues related to national security and armed conflict. Ms. Maisha Richards is a firefighter and paramedic in Washington, D.C. on July 31st, 2020. She was assaulted and beaten by 2 people who called 911 for assistance. One of her attacker's cases was dropped, while the other was recently sentenced to approximately 60 hours of community service. Deputy Mayor Lindsay Apaya Ms. Apaya serves as the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice in Washington, D.C. She previously served as Assistant General Counsel, and Interim Director of the D.C. Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services. And Mr. Thomas Apt is the Chair of the Violent Crime Working Group and a Senior Fellow at the Council on Criminal Justice. His research focuses on violent crime and other public safety problems. Again, thank you, each of you, for being here today. We look forward to your testimony. It's important, and I know you're going to provide us with some real enlightenment today. We will begin by swearing you in. Would you each please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. You may be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes, and I think the light will go yellow on that up there when you have a minute left, and you might hear me lightly tap right about 5 minutes, so you'll know to wrap up if you haven't wrapped up yet. So we're going to begin today with Mr. Stimson first. You're recognized, sir, for 5 minutes.
Chairman Biggs, Ranking Member Lee, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify here this morning. My name is Charles Stimson. I'm a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, but I'm testifying in my own capacity to offer solutions. In the last 30 years, I've practiced criminal law as a criminal defense lawyer, a prosecutor at the local, state, and federal level in 4 different jurisdictions, and a trial judge in the Navy JAG Corps. I also served as an assistant United States attorney here in D.C. in the U.S. Attorney's Office. I was born here in the district. Let me start by saying the obvious. The goal of the criminal justice system is narrow but noble. It's to help solve crime. It's to enforce the criminal laws on the books in a fair, constitutional, and predictable manner. It's not designed to fix society's ills. We have a murder problem in this city. If D.C. was a state, it would have the highest homicide rate per 100,000 residents of all states. In my testimony, I want to address 5 quick points. First, The D.C. City Council's laws and statements by members of that council have eroded accountability and contributed to the rise of crime across the city. The council has proven themselves incapable of creating a revised criminal code for the district. Their goal was to shrink the system, not hold criminals accountable. They had a decarceration agenda from the start. The laws they passed were so radical that they eliminated all mandatory minimum sentences for all crimes except first-degree murder. Second, the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office currently has policies and practices that undermine public safety in the city. Let me give you but two examples. One, guns. The use of guns by a career felon is a huge problem in this city. Every single day, MPD arrests felons in possession of firearms. Ask Greg Pemberton. Yet instead of prosecuting those felons in federal district court under 18 U.S.C. 922G, where they receive a mandatory minimum sentence of at least 5 years, the office instead takes those cases to D.C. Superior Court, where they often get probation and hardly ever prison time. That's a policy choice. Another example. The office has a 67% declination rate, as the chairman mentioned. It was 31% in 2015. But the same size office, 330 prosecutors, exists in San Diego. Over a 20-year period, that office has had a 22.6% declination rate. San Diego doesn't have a crime problem. D.C. does. Third, the judges of the D.C. Superior Court have eroded accountability in the criminal justice system by their notoriously light sentences across all categories of crime, contributing to a culture of lawlessness in our city. The local appeals court in the city, the D.C. Court of Appeals, has issued opinions in the last few years that Congress should review, since they have caused restrictions to be placed on law enforcement authorities and prosecutors that are far beyond the requirements the U.S. Supreme Court has had in precedent. Fourth, the D.C. Attorney General's Office, or OAG, handles juvenile crimes. For decades has failed in its mission to hold violent criminals accountable, including murderers and armed carjackers. Most youths, let me be clear, need to be and are handled in the juvenile justice system. We need a juvenile justice system in this country. But there are certain crimes like murder, armed robbery, armed carjacking, rape, child sexual abuse, and other heinous crimes that should be handled in the adult court. Congress should strip the OAG from prosecuting all crimes and give that to the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. Finally, the D.C. Crime Lab's loss of its certification or suspension of its certification is emblematic of D.C.'s dysfunctional government as a whole. Opened in 2012 at the cost of $210 million, the Crime Lab has had problems from the beginning. The lab had its accreditation suspended in 2021, so the U.S. Attorney's Office has had to use other labs. If the lab gets its accreditation back next year, there's no guarantee it won't lose it again. It's time to solve the problem and offer a solution. Congress should federalize the lab and give it to the FBI, DEA, and ATF, which would then handle all DNA, firearms, fingerprint, and other forensic evidence requests from the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. In conclusion, the crime problem here is a man-made problem. Criminal justice reform is not rocket science. The vast majorities of victims of violent crime in our city are minorities. They deserve to live in peace. They deserve to sleep well at night and not worry about their kids getting shot. They deserve, just like the rest of us, their public safety privilege in their neighborhoods. I thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stimson. And now we'll go to you, Mr. Pemberton. Thank you. And I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. As the chairman of the D.C. Police Union, I speak on behalf of approximately 3,000 sworn police officers, detectives, and sergeants who serve the District of Columbia as members of the Metropolitan Police Department. I'm a detective grade 1. I've worked for the city for 18 years. I take great pride in serving the city. Much of my testimony here today will be a reiteration of testimony I provided to the House Oversight Committee 7 months ago. Unfortunately, since that hearing, crime rates in the District of Columbia have only continued to skyrocket. This testimony will focus on issues related to public safety, crime, and law enforcement, more specifically, how numerous actions by the D.C. Council, to include their rhetoric, has resulted in a mass exodus of sworn law enforcement officers and an exponential increase in violent crime. Beginning in June of 2020, the D.C. Council began introducing anti-police legislation designed, in their own words, to, quote, act accordingly to bend the arc of justice, end quote. I'd like to provide a list of just some of the legislation the D.C. Council would introduce over the course of the next 2 years. The Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Amendment Act, the Strengthening Oversight and Accountability of Police Amendment Act, the Revised Criminal Code Amendment Act, Reducing Law Enforcement Presence in Schools Act, the Law Enforcement Qualified Immunity Cessation Act, the Law Enforcement Present Sense Impression Act, the Law Enforcement Vehicular Pursuit Reform Act, the School Police Incident Oversight and Accountability Amendment Act, and the White Supremacy in Policing Prevention Act. The rhetoric that council members used when speaking publicly about law enforcement amounted to nothing short of virulent attacks on all police officers in the district. One council member even stated in a public hearing, quote, "I know for a fact there are police in the district who are bad actors and who have been going on without the proper penance." He also felt the need for Metropolitan Police officers to receive, quote, "some kind of retribution." Other council members bragged about defunding the department or making, quote, "the biggest reduction to MPD he had ever seen." Without delving into the granular details of how terrible these bills are or how blatantly awful the rhetoric used by the council was, I can assure the members of this committee that the direct result was a mass exodus of police officers from the department. To put a finer point on this issue of attrition, when I took office as head of the police union in April of 2020, our membership reports showed we had 3,626 members of the rank and file, which is all officers, detectives, and sergeants. Our most recent membership report from October 5th of 2023 states we are down to 3,021. This is a net loss of 605 union members. Since the beginning of 2020, MPD has lost 1,329 officers, more than 1/3 of the department. 501 of those separations, nearly 40%, were resignations, employees who just walked away from a career with the Metropolitan Police Department. These dangerously low police officer staffing levels take away valuable resources from our assignments, like detectives and investigative personnel, and impede the department's ability to engage and speak with victims in a timely manner. While there's much rhetoric around the concept of the number of police and the amount of crime, the following facts are indisputable. Crime stats year to date in the district are absolutely staggering. Homicides have reached 218, a 38% increase. Carjackings have reached almost 800, a 110% increase. Robberies are up 70%. Violent crime overall is up 40%, and all crimes are up 28%. These statistics I've mentioned are citywide. If one parses out the data to the neighborhood level, some of these communities have grown to look like war zones. Over the past 3.5 years, our union has been sounding the alarm about this problem to anyone within earshot, including the D.C. City Council. We tried to inform our elected leaders of the unintended consequences of these policies. Unfortunately, we were ignored. D.C. residents and business owners are under siege. Members of Congress are being assaulted and carjacked. Your congressional staff members are being robbed and stabbed. Tourists and visitors, your constituents, are being targeted and attacked. Yet the D.C. Council fails to admit that their policies have played a significant role in this outcome. Now, over 3 years later, we have all seen the results of D.C. Council's experiment. The empirical data is in, and we know for certain that their efforts have been an abject failure, resulting in thousands of more victims of crime in the city. The lasting impacts of these horrible policies will not be fully realized for some time, and the efforts to repair the damage done could take decades without swift and thoughtful actions. If we do not fix the failing policies set in place by the D.C. Council that are pushing our officers to leave MPD, crime will continue to rise and thousands more victims will be subjected to crime and violence. The purpose of my testimony here today is to inform the committee on this ongoing crisis that exists in the district and to publicly state we are prepared to assist in any way we can. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I welcome any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Now, Deputy Mayor Appiah, we recognize you for your 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Biggs, Ranking Member Jackson Lee, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Lindsay Appiah. I serve as Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice for the District of Columbia, a position I was nominated to by Mayor Muriel Bowser and confirmed by the D.C. Council. Serving the residents and visitors of the district in this capacity is the honor of my life. By way of background, I've served for 11 years in district government, all of which have been in public safety and justice, including as General Counsel and Interim Director of the D.C. Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services, the district's juvenile justice agency. I want to acknowledge the witnesses who are sharing their perspectives and experiences at today's hearing, including Ms. Richards and Mr. Pemberton, who serve in agencies under my supervision. On behalf of the mayor and the 700,000 residents of the District of Columbia, I express gratitude for their service and appreciate they're able to be here to share information on the challenges we're facing in the district. Percents and numbers provide critical context. However, we can never lose sight that each statistic on a website or read during a hearing is more than a number. The reality is there are no victimless crimes. We recognize the harm and trauma many have experienced, acknowledge our responsibility to respond soberly and urgently, and vow to work tirelessly to make our city safer, stronger, and a place of collective flourishing. As Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice, I provide direction, guidance, support, and coordination for the district's 12 public safety agencies and the DC National Guard to develop and lead cross-cluster, interagency public safety initiatives to improve the quality of life in district neighborhoods. The missions of these agencies are dynamic and complex. Each plays a critical role in the overall health and functioning of our public safety and justice ecosystem. We call our system an ecosystem because an ecosystem is a complex, interconnected system that's dependent upon each part for its health and optimal functioning. Our interdependent system is centered around prevention, intervention and enforcement, accountability and rehabilitation. Prevention includes those non-law enforcement programs, services, and strategies aimed at decreasing the incidence of individuals committing violent crime and in reducing the community conditions that lead to high rates of violent crime in communities in our city. It encompasses our work on providing coordinated delivery of wraparound services and connecting our residents and their communities to care. Intervention enforcement are primarily law enforcement strategies led by MPD. MPD does currently have the lowest force strength it's had since 1999. We're making investments to ensure that MPD can recruit and retain officers while also making investments in technology that will enhance our ability to efficiently and effectively solve cases and bring much needed and deserved justice for victims in our city. Accountability includes the criminal justice system, which we recognize is vital. Holding people appropriately accountable for their behavior is critical to future determinants. Currently, the DC Superior Court has 11 judicial vacancies. Our ecosystem has many pain and pressure points, but the district is investing significant resources into a multi-pronged public safety approach that invests in law enforcement, prevention efforts, youth programming, re-entry, and rehabilitation. Another complexity is the uniqueness of the district's criminal justice system structure, one that's a mix of local, federal, and independent agencies, most of which are not under the authority of the mayor. We need all of our colleagues in these agencies to match the commitment in the district government to not just combat crime, but to approach the work with the belief that we can prevent the next crime and prevent someone else from becoming a victim. The Mayor Bowser has also maintained we have to have a policy environment that supports appropriate accountability. In the district, we are leaders in systemic reform. This is certainly true in the criminal justice space, where we lead in pushing bounds of what is possible to achieve equal justice for all under the law. We can and should be proud of our progress, but we must not be so proud that we're unwilling to critically evaluate our reforms and adjust when unintended consequences are leading to harmful outcomes, which is why in May, Mayor Bowser sent to the Council for introduction the Safer, Stronger Amendment Act of 2023, a common sense set of policy proposals aimed at providing additional tools across our system to combat crime. The DC Council recognized this as well and passed the Prioritizing Public Safety Emergency Amendment Act, which incorporates several provisions from the Safer, Stronger Act. We know more must be done, and I echo what the mayor testified in May. Our public safety agencies here in DC and across the country need the support of Congress. I'm happy to answer questions about more ways that Congress can help to support all of the efforts that we've described in DC government to actually lower crime in the district. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And now, Chair recognizes Mr. Abt for your 5 minutes.
Chairman Biggs, Ranking Member Jackson Lee, and members of the subcommittee, I am Thomas Abt, Founding Director of the Center for the Study and Practice of Violence Reduction, also known as the Violence Reduction Center, or VRC, located at the University of Maryland, College Park. The VRC's mission is simple. We seek to save lives by stopping violence using science. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today on victims of violent crime in the District of Columbia. This issue is personally and professionally important to me. I live here in the district. I was first exposed to violence while teaching at Roosevelt High School, where one of my students was shot and killed. I fought crime in courtrooms in New York City while working as a local prosecutor. I helped start anti-violence initiatives as a senior federal and state government official. Most recently, I've studied the issue of violent crime while working in academia. Violent crime in the United States should not be a partisan issue. In the wake of the coronavirus pandemic, violence surged around the nation. It rose in urban, suburban, and rural areas. It rose in red states and in blue states. It rose in cities run by Republicans and in those led by Democrats. Recently, rates of violent crime have started to decline. Again, they are decreasing in both red and blue jurisdictions alike. While violence is falling in most cities around the country, that is unfortunately not the case here in the district. As of this past Tuesday, violent crime is up 40% compared with the same time last year and up 30% compared to the same period in 2019 before the pandemic began. Crime has been falling steeply in the district for the past 30 days, but no one should be satisfied with that. Why is crime rising here while falling nationally? We need to acknowledge that this is a complicated question that is hard to answer with certainty. Nationally, our best answer is that violence surged during the pandemic due to the pandemic, unrest following the murder of George Floyd, and a massive surge in legal gun sales. As we get farther from those factors, violence across the country seems to be slowing. Locally, we need to understand that Washington, D.C. is unique. The Metropolitan Police Department is one of more than 20 law enforcement agencies operating in the jurisdiction. Prosecution is split between the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Office of the Attorney General, and judges are appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. There is no other jurisdiction in the nation that is jointly administered in this way. If there's one thing I know after more than 25 years in this field, it's this. Reducing crime and violence is a team sport. If individual players do not play well together, the team will not succeed. Collaboration is key. Collaborating is hard in any jurisdiction, but it is especially hard here in the district due to its unusual local federal structure. That is no excuse. The district can and should do better in communicating, collaborating, and executing its anti-violence strategies. It is not easy, however, and Congress can help the city in several concrete ways. I'll mention just a few here. Every criminal justice system requires the sharing of information to function. Here in the district, however, the Privacy Act of 1974 prohibits federal agencies from disclosing critical information to local agencies. Congress could amend the Privacy Act to enable the effective sharing of information. By the start of 2024, the district's crime lab will have been without accreditation for nearly 3 years. The city needs and deserves a first-rate lab. Congress could support accreditation by appropriating funding for the lab and for external testing in the interim. And the district, as you heard, is currently struggling with numerous judicial vacancies. Congress could pass the District of Columbia Courts of Judicial Vacancy Reduction Act and apply a 60-day congressional review period to D.C. nominees and remove the requirement that the Senate hold hearings and vote on these nominations. None of these actions are likely to garner headlines, but they would make a difference in terms of safety for D.C. residents. They're all nonpartisan and things that members of both parties should be able to agree on. More broadly, just over a year and a half ago, when rates of violent crime across the country were at their peak, I urged this committee to put aside partisanship and support $6 billion in federal funding for evidence-informed anti-violence strategies carried out by local community-based organizations and local law enforcement agencies. That funding and those strategies are still sorely needed today in the district and around the nation. Then as now, we must remember that when it comes to violent crime, it is about solving a deadly serious problem, not winning an abstract argument. It's about emphasizing evidence over ideology. And it's about bringing people together, not pulling them apart. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Apt, for your testimony. And now the chair recognizes Mr. Sobolewski for your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Biggs and Ranking Member Jackson Lee, for the opportunity to address the subcommittee today. While this didn't occur in D.C., I'd first like to honor and recognize my father-in-law, who was shot and killed in Jacksonville, Florida, on December 4th, 2022. I'm going to discuss my experience, though, as a victim of violent crime in the District of Columbia. On December 16th, 2020, I made a series of mistakes that almost cost me my life. Some may say it is victim blaming, but the reality is crime exists. And if you're not careful in violent cities like D.C., you may end up just as another statistic. Shortly after 5 p.m. on December 16th, I left my apartment on N Street in Shaw, just a short walk from the White House. I was headed to get groceries, and I did not realize I would soon face a loaded barrel. Just as I began walking, I noticed a man acting suspiciously. He was looking over at me across the block, and I told myself nothing was wrong and that nothing bad was going to happen to me. After all, the street was busy. What could go wrong? I turned down the block and I headed towards the grocery store, and I checked behind, and there he was, still eyeing me. He followed my direction. Alarmed, I noticed a couple walking just behind me, and behind them, the would-be criminal. I thought to myself, don't worry, there are people right behind me, it's okay. A few moments pass, and I look again, and the couple's nowhere to be seen, and the man is quickly approaching. Before I could think, he was next to me, asking for money. Politely said no, and kept walking, without realizing he had pulled a gun. The criminal stepped in front of me and stated, "You know what it is," before aiming a pistol at my face and pressing it against my forehead. I almost didn't believe it, but then reality set in, and I thought I was going to lose my life to a criminal on the street. He sat me down. I'll never forget our interaction, line by line. He told me, "Do what I say, and you ain't going to die tonight." All I could hear is, "You're going to die tonight." And that my mom would have to come down to D.C. to identify my body on some cold street in Washington, D.C. I remember looking into his eyes and seeing no life, no thought, no empathy, just evil. During the entire interaction where he demanded property after property from me, his finger laid on the trigger while the pistol pointed directly at my head. I fortunately concealed my phone. While I was foolish not to hand it over, it expedited my ability to call for help. I remember the last words out of his mouth, muffled behind his COVID mask. "All right, you did good tonight. You ain't gonna die." I thought, well, this is where he shoots me. He stood me up and told me to walk, and I did. After a few steps, I turn around and I can see him starting to run. I repeatedly told myself, "Mitchell, you have your phone, call 911. I took cover behind a parked car and called exactly who you would want to respond in that situation, the police. Within minutes, squad cars lined 10th and N. I'll never forget seeing the siren lights come and thanking God for the police. A young female officer responded immediately, and I knew I was safe and that my life was spared. While I'm trying to remain in my 5 minutes, I'd like to note that after the arrest, in coordinating with the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., my criminal went to trial. I gladly and passionately wrote a victim impact statement. I pleaded with the judge not to give a lenient sentence, as this man would commit worse crimes than what he did to me. The judge proceeded to give my criminal 24 months and suspended a year of his sentence because the judge believed his judgment was still forming. This light sentence was given despite my criminal robbing 6 victims and 2 businesses. That's right, 1 year for multiple armed robberies. Within weeks of my criminal's release, he would go on to rob 2 more people at gunpoint. And I would only find this out because I was reading the D.C. Weekly Arrests. We'll never be able to eradicate violent crime completely, but we can take action to ensure that it happens less frequently. Today, D.C. has the highest amount of homicides in almost 20 years. It is short 400 police officers, with the average homicide suspect having 11 prior arrests. I implore the subcommittee to understand that policing, prosecuting, and most importantly, incarceration works. Violent crimes should not be dealt with lightly. How many more stories do we have to read about entirely preventable tragedies? Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sobolewski, for your compelling testimony. We appreciate you being here. Mr. Jablonski, I understand you have a video that you wish to show to begin with.
Yes, please.
Yes, I recognize Mr. Jablonski for his 5 minutes, and we will show that video to begin.
Is the 5 minutes running, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, it's running. Mr. Jablonski.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Lee. As horrific as that video is, what happened after was even worse. He was arrested. We found out he was a DoorDash driver, and no reason why he acted that way, still no reason. Within 10 days of him being arrested, after numerous conversations with the DA office saying that I would do anything they needed to not plead this down, there was numerous eyewitnesses. There's a loaded 9mm, it's kind of hard to see there, that was pointed at my son. Not only was it loaded, there was one in the chamber. When I knocked it out of his pants, luckily it didn't go off because it could have killed someone. The DA told me that they had to take into account their resources and my resources, and that they would plead this down to a attempted assault with a dangerous weapon and illegal possession of a firearm. When I challenged them as to why they would do that and how does that take into account the endangerment of a minor, I was told that DC does not have a law for endangerment of a minor. After all that, I asked, okay, well, what's the sentencing guidelines you're asking for? 12 to 18 months. I went to the sentencing date. He was released on his own recognizances, basically. Went to the sentencing date, made a victim impact statement, and without a doubt in my mind, if I didn't do that, his attorney was asking for a divergence, and he probably wouldn't released. So out of this entire situation, I now have bad publicity for my own business because people now are worried that there's somebody on the street walking around with a gun because it's 2:30 in the afternoon. People are now telling me, well, I'm hesitating about ordering from DoorDash, which maybe hurts DoorDash, but also hurts the small businesses that support and sell through DoorDash. And then on top of everything else, he gets 8 months, and I'm left with explaining to my 5-year-old that why I had to fight this man, and my 5-year-old tells me when I drop him off at school every day to be safe. I understand, I'm born here, been in the bar industry for 25 years. I've seen the craziest things you can imagine. In the last 2-3 years, the brazenness of the violent acts that are going on in the city, but just around in general, have gotten to the point where it's ridiculous. And now that I've been through the whole process from start to finish, you could enact whatever law you want. We could have 1,000 new gun laws. We could have 1,000 new police officers. You could throw millions at this DA's office. If nobody's going to do their job and prosecute and hold people accountable, what's the point? Thank you, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jablonski, for your testimony. Chair recognizes Ms. Richards for your 5 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Maisha Richards, and I'm a firefighter paramedic with DC Fire and EMS. I've been in the fire service since 2009, and I began as a volunteer and loved every minute of my duties. My dream was to become a firefighter paramedic in the nation's capital. I spent countless hours perfecting my craft in hopes of being able to serve the citizens of Washington, D.C. My hard work finally paid off, and I was hired on October 16, 2017. When I graduated from the academy, I was assigned to Engine 32 in Ward 8. I've loved every minute while working in the community and being able to help the citizens in any way that I can. One of my favorite things to do is to engage with the community and talk with the MPD officers. At times, we played basketball together with neighborhood kids when we had some downtime. On July 31st, 2020, my partner and I responded to a 911 call for a 19-year-old female in respiratory distress. When I arrived on scene, we had to get fully dressed from head to toe in full COVID PPE before we can enter the home. In the academy, they teach us that scene safety is one of the most important things on a call. As a provider, you have to be safe. You have to make sure your partner is safe to ensure proper and safe patient care. Once we entered, we found 2 females and 1 male in a back bedroom. The female caller was irate and stated we took too long and did not care about COVID, and that she did not care about COVID. The gentleman standing in the corner told her to allow us to do our job. The 2 subjects then began to fight each other. My partner and I did what we were trained to do, which is get out of the house and call a 1033 code to bring police for help. I made it to the landing of the steps, reached for my radio, and before I could call the 1033, both of the females jumped over the banister onto the landing and began to punch and kick me while pulling my hair and holding my head down in place, naturally making the radio fall down the flight of steps. The man on scene stood holding my partner at the top of the stairs. 2 minutes went by before I was able to get free and get my radio to call for help. I suffered a severe concussion and had a laceration above my eye, which required stitches. These were the physical wounds that in time healed. However, the mental impact will last a lifetime. Since this event, I have been to the Center of Excellence, which is a rehab and mental health facility for firefighters. I'm having to learn how to live with PTSD and still do the job I love without being anxious and fearing for the worst on every call. Prior to 2020, I felt like MPDs respond to these routine medical calls in Ward 8 more. Their police presence was all that was needed to ensure our safety and to make sure the citizens were safe and able to get the care without any violent interruptions. I feel safer on the job when I know MPD is either there or just a quick call away. And we as a department are grateful for them, especially when they're looking out for us on these streets. The amount of assaults, violence, and shootings in the district are skyrocketing, and it makes me feel less safe, especially after my incident. Just this week, my coworkers can be heard screaming over the radio for a 1033 because an agitated patient tried to climb into the driver's compartment, maybe even trying to steal the ambulance. During all of this chaos, a gunshot wound victim was dropped off in the same place. This year, I received a phone call from the DA telling me nothing was going to happen to the 2 women who assaulted me. I was told that one of the women would receive community service, not because of what she did to me, but because while in the process of prosecuting her for this crime, she picked up additional charges. The other woman's charge would be dropped. I love this city, but we need to do better, and our first responders need to feel safe. The nation's capital is no longer a place where firefighters and EMS workers can render care to those in need without worrying of becoming a patient themselves. Several times a month, we are on calls, running from nearby gunshots or having a stage prior to going into a violent scene because we are waiting for police officers to respond. When I took the oath and was sworn in to be a firefighter paramedic in Washington, D.C., I was fully prepared and aware the possibility of dying in a fire could become a reality at any moment. However, I did not expect that while helping someone during their most vulnerable time in need during a medical emergency, that the tables could quickly turn on me, and I could become a victim of an assault and lose my life trying to save another. In closing, I want to thank you all for this opportunity to share my story in hopes to find a solution to this detrimental uptick in violence and crime we have in the nation's capital, and that our first responders are being looked out for, so we can look out for the citizens of Washington, D.C. who need our help.
Thank you, Ms. Richards, for your testimony. Chair recognizes now Mr. Gates for his 5 minutes of questions.
Madam Deputy Mayor, are people more or less safe this year compared to last year in Washington, D.C.?
Sorry, I can't say whether they're more or less safe. I can say that crime is up, and so long as anyone doesn't feel safe, then that's an issue for us.
Would higher crime rates be one of the more important indicators as to whether or not people are more or less safe?
It would be an indicator as to whether or not people feel more or less safe. So it's something that we certainly look at in determining that.
I don't know. I think people could feel unsafe even if they were safe, but this doesn't seem to be a delusion, right? The cases of sexual assault rose 111% over the course of a year. Homicides increased by 38%. Motor vehicle thefts doubled, increasing 106%. Instances of arson over 125%, and carjackings by 55%. Why do you think that is?
There's a host of complex reasons why that's the case. You've heard some. We talk about our ecosystem, policy reasons, right?
Do you think those soft on crime policies are one reason?
I don't know that I would say soft on crime policies. What I would say is that there's a number of reforms in policy that have been made in the district that we believe need to be adjusted, which is why there's been a number of proposals from the mayor, legislation passed by the council to take a look at where we're getting the type of impact that we don't want.
I agree with Mr. Apt that the only way this works is with collaboration. And so what do you think you would highlight as like the main policy change that the mayor has proposed that could maybe put some downward pressure on this rising violent crime?
Sure. There's a host of proposals that the mayor made related to penalty enhancements, to aligning penalties for gun crimes with federal penalties. So there's those, but there's also those on information sharing.
So hold on, let's start with those though. But the underlying premise there is that enhanced punishment can have a deterrent effect and reduce crime, right?
We absolutely agree with that. Yes, that accountability is an important part of crime deterrence.
And I'm definitely not blaming you for this because it's not your job, but when we look at the fact that the prosecutor over the DC area has doubled their declinations, like from your standpoint on the front lines in city government, do you think that doubling the number of declinations goes in the right direction or the wrong direction?
I would say that what we believe is that if MPD has made arrests, that people need to be held appropriately accountable. We always maintain that, Mayor Powell.
But like it seems like the underlying premise of appropriately accountable is to have penalty enhancements. That it's not as if you think people are being held too accountable, it's that they're not being held accountable enough, right?
There absolutely needs to be accountability for those who engage in violent crime.
I think Ms. Richards would probably agree with that. Your testimony was harrowing, but it could really concern me that people might not be willing to do these life-saving, critically important jobs like firefighting and EMS if they feel like they're going into a war zone. You gave testimony about what it was like to wait on police as you're trying to save people's lives and help them. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I mean, that's the state that we're in right now. You know, I mean, I've waited in excess of 20 minutes before to try to get MPD on scene for a violent call.
What do you do for 20 minutes?
We stage and we wait because at this point, we're no longer going in, we're not going to those scenes.
And what happens to the people that need your
the
help?
citizens are not getting treated, right? They can't have our services because it's not safe for us to go in there.
That sounds like life or death to me, that people could actually die because we don't have enough police to keep even our own first responders safe that want to save people's lives. Have you been confronted with these type of life or death situations where people can't get the care they need because you're waiting for firepower and cover to be able to go help people?
I can say that yes, there's been times where we have to wait. And like I said, I've waited personally myself in excess of 20 minutes for MPD to arrive on scene.
Yeah, I would observe, Mr. Chairman, that DC has some of the strongest gun control laws in the country, and increasingly the law-abiding people, the people who want to be helpful, who want to be good neighbors, are constrained by those gun control laws, and yet the violent criminals are putting Ms. Richards and all the people who want to do the good work she does in graver danger, and that might be something worthy of some federal review. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes the ranking member, Ms. Jackson-Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I want to yield to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Nadler, who then yield to the District of Columbia Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. I yield to Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This hearing is not a serious exercise. My Republican colleagues have shown very little interest in the welfare of the people of Washington, D.C., and this political stunt is further evidence of that. Rather than asking questions myself, I'd like to yield my time to the person who has dedicated her life to representing the nation's capital and its residents, a gentlewoman from Washington, D.C., Ms. Norton.
I just want to kind of a personal clarification. So Whose time is Mr. Nadler's? It's Mr. Nadler's time going to Ms. Norton. Okay, thank you. Ms. Norton, you're recognized.
Thank you, and I thank my good friend for yielding. As the only member of Congress elected by the nearly 700,000 District of Columbia residents, I appreciate the opportunity to wave onto this committee for the purposes of this hearing. I'm deeply saddened that some of the witnesses for this hearing were victims of crime in the district. However, while the federal government controls much of DC's criminal justice system, to the extent that this hearing focuses on DC's local laws and local government, it violates the purposes of the DC Home Rule Act, which is to, among other things, and I'm quoting, grant the inhabitants of the District of Columbia powers of local self-government and relieve the Congress of the burden of legislating upon essentially local district matters, end quote. While Congress has constitutional authority to legislate on local DC matters, it does not have a constitutional duty to do so. Instead, legislating on local DC matters is a choice. James Madison said in Federalist 43 about the residents of the district, and I'm quoting, a municipal legislature for the local purposes derived from their own suffrages will, of course, be allowed them, end quote. The Supreme Court has held that Congress may delegate, quote, full legislative power to DC on local DC matters. DC's local legislature, the DC Council, has 13 members. The members are elected by DC residents. If DC residents do not like the laws the council adopts, they can vote the members out of office. That is called democracy. Congress has 535 voting members. The members are elected by residents of states. None are elected by or accountable to DC residents. If DC residents do not like the laws Congress adopts, they cannot vote the members out of office. The Revolutionary War was fought to give consent to the governed and to end taxation without representation. Yet DC residents cannot consent to any action taken by Congress, whether on national or local DC matters, and pay full federal taxes. Indeed, DC residents pay more federal taxes per capita than any state and more local federal taxes than 19 states. DC residents, a majority of whom are Black and brown, are capable and worthy of governing themselves. If House Republicans cared about democratic principles or local DC residents, they would bring my DC statehood bill, which would give DC residents voting representation in Congress and full local self-government, to the floor. Congress has the constitutional authority to admit the state of Washington, D.C. It simply lacks the will. I yield back, and I thank the chairman.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've heard testimony today about a culture of lawlessness in Washington, D.C., and how crime rates are absolutely staggering. And this is, of course, sadly true in other places across the United States, in Manhattan, in Chicago, in San Francisco, and Los Angeles. But D.C. is a particularly compelling case study because of the unique nature of the district as a sort of self-contained jurisdiction. It allows us to really parse the different elements of that culture of lawlessness and how they've become mutually reinforcing in a way that has caused crime to spiral out of control. And specifically, those elements would be the laws, police, prosecutors, and judges. So starting first with the laws, Detective Pemberton, you represent 3,000 sworn officers, is that right?
Yes, sir. Excuse me. Yes, sir. That's correct.
Thank you for your service and for all of them for the incredibly important and dangerous work that they do on a daily basis. You described in your testimony a spate of anti-police legislation such as the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Act of 2020, the Revised Criminal Code Amendment Act of 2021, the Reducing Law Enforcement Presence in Schools Act of 2021. How would you summarize the overall effect of this legislation on criminal penalties in the district?
Well, it's very wide-reaching. So the first thing I would point to is the staffing levels and the morale within the police department. And as I stated in my testimony, I think we're down somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 police officers from where we were just before this legislation was introduced. The legislation is designed to hamper and hamstring police officers and make it absolutely difficult for them to do their jobs. And in addition to that, it exposes them to liability of administrative, civil, and even criminal penalties, even when they go out and do their job properly, responsibly, and constitutionally. So the one major aspect of that is that people will leave an agency. They don't want to work under those sort of onerous provisions. But the other part of it is that it has a chilling effect, that there are still obviously thousands of police officers that have not left the agency, but there's a second guessing as to whether or not they want to engage in the positive, proactive policing that they used to engage in, which was so effective at keeping these crime rates low. So those are the two major aspects of what has happened, at least to the rank and file. But as you stated in your question, the effects go into the entire ecosystem, as the deputy mayor mentioned.
That's right.
Every aspect of the criminal justice system in D.C. is broken, and the reason it's broken is because of these laws that the D.C. Council.
And so that actually answers my next question. So you have this lowering of penalties across the board, and then even where penalties exist, you just still have someone needs to get caught in order to be subject to those penalties. And the defunding of police and the anti-police rhetoric from politicians here has decreased that presence in the city. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. So when we talk about this ecosystem of criminal justice, the front end of that, the intake system, is police officers putting handcuffs on people who they have probable cause to believe committed a crime. If we're not doing that, a lot of the stuff downstream of that, prosecutions, judges, supervision, that has very little effect because the number of people that we're actually arresting and bringing in.
That's right. And then when we go downstream, Mr. Stimson used to work for the chief prosecutor here. How do the prosecution rates here compare to other jurisdictions?
So I've worked in 4 DA offices. And here, this is the highest declination rate of any of those 4 DA offices. As I said in my written testimony and in my oral statement, take 2 like-sized city DA offices. San Diego has 330 DAs. The U.S. Attorney's Office has 330 DAs. As was just mentioned, there's 700,000 residents here in the district, which is about 2,000 and some persons per prosecutor. San Diego has 3.2 million residents in the county. So those prosecutors each serve about 9,000 plus residents. Yet the San Diego DA's office in the last 20 years has a 22.6% declination rate and a 77% issuance rate of charges. And so San Diego doesn't have a crime problem. And I would respectfully disagree with one of the other witnesses and those who mentioned that crime only spiked during COVID. It actually started going up in 2016. Sure. In cities with soft on crime prosecutors.
And then you also testified as to how the judges in this district tend to have much lighter sentencing than in other jurisdictions as well. So at each stage of it, you have an unavailability of serious penalties. You have a limited police presence because of defunding and other anti-police policies. You have a very high declination rate by the prosecutor, and then even when people are prosecuted, very light sentences for the judges. And so that culture of lawlessness has contributed to this jurisdiction having a higher murder rate than anywhere else in the country, and these absolutely staggering crime statistics that we heard. Now, I'm out of time, but just as a final question, Detective Pemberton, I think that perhaps the biggest thing that we can do to change that culture of lawlessness is to create a new level of support for law enforcement, to recruit more folks into the profession, to improve morale. Do you have thoughts on how we can do that?
Gentleman's time has expired, but Detective Pemberton, you may respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, that's right. So these, particularly when we're talking about these bills passed by the City Council, the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Act, this is absolutely detrimental to the hiring and the attrition rates of the Metropolitan Police Department. Without getting rid of at least some of the provisions within that bill, it's going to be impossible for us to staff the police departments at the level that meets the demand that's out there for citizens who are requesting police services.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the ranking member, Ms. Jackson-Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me first of all ask to put into the record the information about Washington being #1 in police per capita and the amount of money spent on crime.
Without objection.
Thank you. Let me, again, the stories were horrific, and crime victims, there should be zero tolerance, and we all have to come together to make that happen. I am, to Mr. Jablonski, to watch your little one. I know what that means to you. Thank you for your courage to come here today, sir.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you. Let me try to get our hands around what we need to do. So let me just get right to the heart of things, Ms. Appiah. What is the district doing to address violent crime? What is the district doing to address carjackings?
Sure. So we describe the ecosystem because that's important, and so the district's making investments in all of those spaces. The first is prevention. I agree with Mr. Pemberton that obviously enforcement is important, but to us, I have a public health background. Preventing crime is the best way to have less victims. So there's been significant investments made in violence intervention and prevention, which we're grateful for the investments that were made through the American Rescue Plan Act, which allowed us to put funds into violence interruption services and also victim services. The district grants $100 million worth of grants to providers, community-based providers.
But you're not thwarting or stopping your police from engaging right on the streets, arresting and bringing in carjackers.
That's correct. There are a number of policing strategies. All of these have to work together. So
and you are respecting the police for them to do their job.
Mayor Bowser is that you will find no mayor who is more supportive of the police than Mayor Bowser.
What is the greatest challenge for the district's ability to respond to violent crime?
One of it is the complexities of our federal local system. You heard Mr. App describe information sharing. We know that even law enforcement strategies like focused deterrence or otherwise work when the entities all work together. We don't have one governor.
My staff is making note of that right now. There's no reason there should not be information sharing. Let me move quickly, if you don't mind. I've got a short period of time. You enacted emergency legislation in July that changed the landscape of prosecutions. Do you want to just let us know how that is happening? And is that the same legislation as the Prioritizing Public Safety Emergency Amendment?
That's correct.
So I want to hold up that this is law.
Correct.
Can you just give us a snippet? I've got so many other questions I want to ask Mr. App.
It increases the presumption for pretrial detention, which has led to more people being held pretrial. It increases penalty for things like unlawful discharge of a firearm. There's things related to pretrial detention for juveniles, which we know is an issue. There also was a companion bill that clarifies the ability of law enforcement to pursue in a manner consistent with safe policy.
Okay. Does the declination rate, is that coming down? Because the U.S. Attorney said it is.
I can't speak on behalf of the U.S. Attorney, but we are seeing more holds for those with gun crimes, so we can make, I can't say causation, but certainly a correlation.
So you have strong gun laws, but your surrounding neighbors don't. And so the issue is you don't block any citizen from having their guns, legal guns, but what you're seeing is the gun trafficking on the street.
That's correct.
And how does that happen?
So we have significant gun trafficking from our neighbors in Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. That is where the illegal flow of guns into the district is. So working with our partners like ATF and FBI and our federal partners is deeply important to help us stop gun trafficking and the flow of guns.
So you are committed to fighting gun trafficking and carjacking, things
Absolutely.
and robberies on the street.
Without equivocation, we are.
And so the alcohol, tobacco, and firearm, and FBI, for those acronyms may not be familiar, they can do a lot more, or you can work a lot more with them. Is that my understanding?
That's correct.
Mr. App, let me first of all very quickly indicate that correction of Mr. Stimson. There is no mandatory minimum for gun possession in the federal laws, but there is a mandatory minimum in D.C. They're not weak on crime in many instances, but they do have to help their victims and stop that. Mr. App, why don't you explore your COVID pandemic concept? Because I agree with you. And though you say that crime here is huge, but just explain that concept about the surge in crime across America.
Sure. So
the gentleman's time has expired, but you may answer the question, Mr. Abt.
You may answer the question, but thank you.
Sure. So in 2020, we had one of the largest single-year increases in homicide across the country that we've ever seen, approximately 28%. And as I said, no jurisdiction or almost no jurisdiction was spared, regardless of political affiliation. Violent crime rose again the following year, was flat in 22, and is now slightly coming down, thankfully. And as I said, most experts agree on generally 3 reasons for this surge in crime. Although Mr. Stimson is correct that there was a surge in crime in 2016 as well. But focusing on this 2020 surge, it was the pandemic itself, unrest following the murder of George Floyd, and this massive surge in gun sales. All 3 of these things together contributed to pushing the rates higher, and as we get farther from that, they seem to be decreasing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses. Thank you for your presence here.
Thank you. The gentlelady's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Tiffany.
Mr. Abt, are you saying the lockdowns did not work?
The
lockdowns led to higher crime, is what I heard you say.
No, I certainly did not say that, Congressman. Can you repeat the question?
You said during the COVID lockdowns that crime went up in 2020.
During the pandemic, they went up, yes.
And so the American people were locked down. I came here and I was sworn in here on May 19th of 2020. I couldn't believe I could drive from the suburbs of Virginia to this location right here in about 5 minutes. Nobody was here. You said violent crime went up. So didn't the COVID lockdowns, weren't they part of the contributing factor?
I think that's an inappropriate connection between these two. I can't speak to that.
Deputy Mayor, D.C. Council Chairman Phil Mendelson said there is not a crime crisis in Washington, D.C. Do you agree with him?
Oxford defines a crisis as a time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger, and so I would say that we find ourselves in an intense time of trouble or danger. So I would say there is a crisis anytime someone's a victim of crime in the district, regardless of the number.
Mr. Chairman, it sounds like we've identified part of the problem here with the D.C. Council when somebody will not acknowledge that there's a crisis, and by the very definition, as the Deputy Mayor said, there is a crisis. Mr. Pemberton, so we're hearing about guns are the problem and guns coming from other states are the problem. Are crimes being prosecuted to their fullest that include guns here in D.C.? Is prosecution, are the judges giving the fullest sentences they can with gun crimes?
No, absolutely not. So some of the rhetoric that we hear around crime in the district is that it comes from illegal guns and that we have to focus on illegal guns, and that if we find a way to get illegal guns out of the hands of criminals, crime will come down. And that's not necessarily wrong. And our officers for our union, I think last year we arrested about 3,100 people for possession of an illegal firearm. The problem is that even when we're able to get those cases papered and prosecuted and then a conviction, the average sentence that judges are handing out right now for that penalty is 6 months supervised release, which is 0 jail time. That is the going rate, is what we say, for people who are in possession of illegal guns.
Repeat that, 6 months?
6 months of supervised probation. So that would be someone who's convicted of being in possession of an illegal firearm in the District of Columbia. The maximum penalty is 5 years under the D.C. Code. However, the penalties that D.C. Superior Court judges are handing out regularly are more along the lines of probation only.
Probation only for a gun crime?
That's right, and just to make a finer point on this, it doesn't seem like the city takes those crimes as seriously as they suggest, given the fact that the courts are not penalizing people who are found convicted of those crimes.
Was that your experience, Mr. Jablonski?
Absolutely. If I didn't make that victim impact statement, the defendant's attorney was asking for a divergence, and I was told by the DAs afterwards that they're glad that I came because most likely he would have received divergence.
Is Victim Services doing their job in D.C.?
I mean, they were very nice and, they were helpful. But there's really, the only thing I wanted to see real justice. I wanted to see something that showed me that they took into account what happened to me and my family. And what I saw wasn't.
Mr. Sobolewski, is Victim Services doing their job in Washington, D.C.?
I'd say they're doing their job. It's hard to say that the police, the prosecutors, and the judges are doing their jobs. Maybe the police are out there making arrests. Prosecutors aren't prosecuting. What's going on there? Judges, they're letting criminals out on the street. My guy was given 1 year in jail. What did he do within weeks upon release? My father-in-law was murdered by a guy with a rap sheet to 1971. Why are they on the streets?
Have you lost, Mr. Pemberton, have you lost officers to other jurisdictions around this region?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. A lot of the officers that leave have been going to neighboring jurisdictions. Particularly what's interesting is Northern Virginia takes a lot of our members.
I'm going to close with this, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to make the case once again. I want this committee to come to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to hear the story here. We've heard it in New York City, Chicago, and now in Washington, D.C. I urge this committee and the chairman to schedule a hearing in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where the district attorney said, will I divert some who will go on to kill someone? Absolutely. That's the problem here in the United States of America, is a soft on crime attitude.
Hey, gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. McBath.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you also, Ranking Member Sheila Jackson-Lee, and thank you for our witnesses today and for all of you that are witnesses that have suffered these horrific tragedies, and you continue to be inflicted with this trauma every single day. I am so very sorry. I sit before you today as a mother who has suffered as a victim of gun violence. I'm here because of an epidemic that has unequivocally and completely just plagued our country for just too long. I've dedicated my time while I have been here in Congress to reducing gun violence and advocating for common sense gun laws to keep our neighborhoods, to keep our families safe, to keep you safe. Regardless of the city that you call home or the person representing you in public office, one fact remains true. We need comprehensive, common-sense gun laws to end the violence that threatens the American people. As members of Congress, we are tasked with making a genuine difference in this country and taking steps to reduce violence by enacting federal gun laws that keep our families and our children safe. This committee alone has numerous bills that will reduce violent crimes in D.C. and across our country once they are implemented. We made a historic step in the right direction last Congress with the passage of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which invests $750 million into extreme risk protection orders to improve crisis intervention and empower our law enforcement and loved ones. And it also invests $250 million in community-based violence intervention programs to support our communities that are crying out for our help. The successful passage of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act is a testament to our ability to unify in Congress and continue to fulfill our promise to fight for the safety of every American. These are our communities, our children, our loved ones. And gun violence should be a deep personal concern for each and every one of us here today, including all of my colleagues in this committee. And following this hearing, I would urge that all my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to turn their concerns about violence into action. Continue the fight against gun violence with me and join on my Federal Extreme Risk Protection Order Act of 2023 so that we can link our actions into words. Empower loved ones, those who seek the warning signs of being in crisis first, and law enforcement. Help them to help keep guns away from those who are a danger or at risk to themselves or hurting others. What truly matters is not which side of the aisle that we all fall on, but the countless lives that are lost in this country to unnecessary gun violence every single day. No mother, no parent, no American should ever experience the pain of losing a loved one. We must work together to end the epidemic of gun violence. Now, investments are being made by the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that are aimed at prevention. Deputy Mayor Appiah and Mr. Apt, as we look forward to ways to reduce violent crime across the country, how will a federal bill to authorize federal extreme risk protection orders contribute to reducing violent crimes across our country?
Thank you for the question. I think if you look at the research that's been assembled by the RAND Institute, there's good research showing that extreme risk protection orders can save lives. They can particularly save lives in terms of avoiding homicides, and there's some evidence that they can avoid homicides as well. So I think that those laws and the support that Congress made for those laws in terms of enacting them in the best ways is a very strong step forward.
I would say the same thing as Mr. Apt. The district actually currently, I am co-chairing with our DC Council a working group on how we can better utilize resources around extreme risk protection orders to keep district residents more safe.
Well, thank you so much. I know that I have crisscrossed this country fighting to change our dangerous gun laws. And I know that there are many in this room that have also worked as activists on the ground in the movement to do the same. No one in this country deserves ever to be affected by this violent culture that we're living in. And I promise you that my colleagues and I will do whatever we can to keep you safe.
The gentlelady's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Earlier this morning, this hearing was referred to as a political stunt. I'd like to begin by asking us all to remember that we are joined here today by the men and women of law enforcement, first responders, and the victims of violent crimes. They deserve our serious consideration of this gravely important issue. So let's start with reality. The number of law enforcement officers assigned to a region per capita won't stop crime when law enforcement officers are prevented from doing their jobs by bad law. The number of prosecutors in a community will not stop crime when they do not bring cases and they do not enforce the law. And it isn't enough to have judges on the bench when judges won't follow the rules and won't enforce the laws. We owe a responsibility to the citizens of Washington, D.C., and the visitors from around the world who come to our nation's capital to keep them safe. And all too often they are here and they are the victims of violent crime. They are being carjacked, they are being assaulted, they are being shot in the street. We must face the reality of the crime epidemic in Washington, D.C., and do more. And the reason that we are here is plain and it is obvious. It is the reckless and irresponsible rhetoric and failed policies of the Democrat Party and the Biden administration that has emboldened criminals in cities across America. We owe the residents here and the visitors to our capital so much more. And as a former federal prosecutor and judge, I will tell you this. There is one thing that reliably keeps a violent predator from recidivating, and it is called prison. Do some offenders deserve second chances? Absolutely. But do murderers, sex offenders, and rapists need to be out on bond? Do they need wraparound services? Do those who are out on conditions of bond who violate them deserve another chance? No. They deserve to be in custody, and they need to remain in custody for the safety of the citizens of this community. We need to support the men and women of law enforcement. We need prosecutors who will enforce the laws. We need judges who will follow the laws and enforce the rules. It is that simple, and what we see here today, the testimony that we have heard today, is the entirely predictable outcome of the reckless and irresponsible rhetoric and policies of the Democrat Party, who are undermining the men and women of law enforcement and the rule of law in America. Mr. Stinson, I would like to start with you. In your prior testimony, you referenced juvenile offenders specifically. I'd like to explore the effects that you believe policies related to juvenile offenders are having on the crime problem in D.C., and how we could be doing more to ensure that that issue is under control.
Well, thank you for your question. I think we both agree as former prosecutors that we need a juvenile justice system, and that is designed to help rehabilitate those people who make dumb mistakes when they're young, and we believe most can be rehabilitated. But when you do murder, multiple murders, rapes, carjackings, you heard the chairman mention the number of carjackings committed this year by juvenile offenders. The number one age is 15 here in the district who are doing armed carjackings. And so under Title 16, which is a local law here in the district, the U.S. Attorney's Office can take 16 and 17-year-olds and prosecute them as an adult. Many other jurisdictions don't have that type of shackles, and they allow violent criminals who do murder, rape, robbery, and the rest of it, and waive them to adult court, which is what should happen in this city because we have a juvenile violent crime problem. And if I could just add, when I was talking about gun possessions and taking it to federal court, I said felon in possession. And as you know, as a former federal prosecutor, felon in possession under 1922G, on 922G, is a mandatory minimum. And what happens in this city is that they charge them with, in Superior Court, they charge them with carrying a pistol without a license, felon in possession, unregistered firearm, unregistered ammunition. They deal away the felon in possession in Superior Court. They plead to carrying a pistol without a license, and as Pemberton said, they get a slap on the wrist. And so when I was a criminal defense attorney, I wanted my client to get the best deal. I want them to be tried in Superior Court here in the District of Columbia, not federal district court, regardless of what the sentence is, because you know they're going to get a hard sentence in federal court.
Should those juvenile offenses...
I'm sorry, the gentlelady's time has expired.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the ranking member Lee also for putting forward this hearing today. Thank you all for your testimony. For those who are the victims of violent crime, I'm thinking particularly of your little boy. My heart goes out to all of you, and I thank you for telling your stories, because your stories are in search of solutions. That's what this committee ought to be about, searching for solutions, not finger pointing at a single DA, or let's just say it's the entire Biden administration's fault that there are violent crimes in this country. We are more serious than that. We must be more serious than that. I know that I have cared about the issue of gun violence my entire adult life, and I'm here in Congress. It is one of my most important passions to make a difference, and that's why I'm very proud that last year we did pass the Safer Communities Act, and I look forward to learning how violence interruption grants and others are making a difference. It's the first time in 30 years that Congress did anything around gun violence. So join us in these solutions is what I suggest to every member of Congress. It's distressing to hear of violence here in D.C., which has become my second home. But it's not unique to here. I'm from the Philadelphia suburbs. Philadelphia is the city I call home. It is not unique to here. It is sadly a nationwide epidemic. And one of the big issues is the number of guns on the street. And to your point, Mr. Simpson, the number of young people, children, with illegal guns. So Deputy Mayor Apaya, could you help me? How do the laws in and around D.C. affect guns in D.C.? Where are these guns coming from? Do we have gun manufacturers in D.C. that are selling guns?
No.
Okay. Where are the guns coming from?
As I said, so our neighbors to the north in Maryland and to the south in what's the I-95 corridor of Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia are the primary locations where illegal guns are coming in. So there is no question the district has strict gun laws, but those around us do have more lax gun laws, which have allowed the district to be flooded with unlawful guns from those locations.
Exactly, flooded, and we are seeing that throughout this country. where guns are coming in from other jurisdictions with more lax gun laws. Before I yield to my good friend, I wanted to just note something. Please be aware, to those of you who are here today, that members on the other side of this aisle have argued in hearing after markup after hearing of defunding ATF, defunding the FBI. That is not a solution. That's actually contributing to the problem. We've got to stop demonizing. And with that, and we have to lift up that which is those who are working for us to make us safer. With that, I yield to my good friend, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Ivey.
I thank the gentlelady, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me quasi-wave in today. I appreciate the chance to be here. I don't have enough time to cover all the things I want to chat about, but I do want to note that, yes, I was a former assistant U.S. attorney. I was here from 1990 to 1994, which was the height of the crack wars. D.C. averaged 450 to 500 murders per year during that time frame. And in fact, carjacking, I think, was invented during that time frame. So I understand the violent crime. I also understand that it went down pretty dramatically, and not for the reasons that have been presented here today. So I do want to emphasize that we want to have a serious approach to addressing these. Mr. Apt is someone actually I'm working with right now to try and bring to Prince George's County to address some of these issues. But smart on crime is more effective than tough on crime. I do want to challenge the suggestion, Ms. Lee, I think, was saying, you know, we just need to be tougher, tougher, tougher. We saw that movie. That was 2.2 million people incarcerated from incarcerating people for everything, and that was marijuana on up. I do want to say, yes, we want to be tough on serious violent offenders, and after I left the U.S. Attorney's Office, I became the state's attorney in Prince George's County, which is the border of D.C., and we're still working to try and coordinate things with D.C. and as we bring this down. But guns is a key piece. I note that a lot of the crimes that have been discussed here involve guns. Most of the gun cases that are involved are the ones we see on the news at night. Ghost guns, for example, and Ms. Appia talked about guns coming from out of state. I can't get any Republican co-sponsors for any of the legislation we've proposed to try and address some of these problems, including ghost guns, which I think everybody will agree is a problem. And they don't even have to go to Virginia to get a ghost gun. They can just email the request and have it mailed into the district. So I'm sorry I won't have a chance to discuss the policing issues and the sentencing issues, because I appreciate the work you all do, but there are major differences, I think, between the solutions you're offering today and the best approaches to addressing the crime problem. So I apologize for running over, and hopefully I'll have a chance to do more later on in the hearing.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sobolewski, your experience is one that is a fear that many people walk around with daily and hope that they will not have to be the actual victim. And so I appreciate you coming and sharing your harrowing experience. And I'm sorry that that happened to you, and that the person who did that was insufficiently punished. And Mr. Jablonski, same sentiment for you. I thought about what I would do if I had been in the restaurant, just me and you and that guy, and what I would have done. Would I have come to your assistance? Would I have been as brave as your little son to stand there? You know, he couldn't do anything. I wondered what I would do in that situation. But I'm glad that you made it out of there okay, and I'm sorry that you had to go through that. And Ms. Richards, public safety employee, I'm very sorry that you don't feel safe doing your job, which is to help people. Very sorry about that. Detective Pemberton, thank you for your service. I understand that law enforcement is a difficult occupation, and a lot of people decide to leave a lower-paying police department, such as Washington, D.C., and go to one after they get the training and some experience, go to another department where the stress levels are less and the pay is greater. So I'm not sure that I agree with the inference that what the civilian authority has enacted would cause a significant number of law enforcement officers to just resign and turn in their badge and do away with law enforcement. I just don't know if that is the way we should be thinking about things. But Mr. Apt, you are the founding director of the Center for the Study and Practice of Violence Reduction, and an associate research professor and senior fellow at the Council on Criminal Justice. So you've studied these issues. From your research, what are the specific drivers of violence at the macro and the micro level? And what has your research shown about how evidence-based prevention and intervention strategies can work alongside law enforcement strategies to reduce violent crime?
Sure. I think at the broadest macro level, I think that it's a combination of the factors that are pushing people towards crime and the factors that are pushing people against. So broadly speaking, factors like concentrated poverty push people towards crime, and then the society's response to those crimes is important as well. And so thinking broadly about those is important. On the micro level, I think the evidence shows that what's most likely, what's the strongest predictor of violence is previous violent behavior and previous exposure to violence. And so that's something that I think we can all agree that we need to focus on and take very seriously.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Apaya, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. One of the things that we believe in the district is we need to address both what is acutely happening through enforcement or otherwise, but also root causes, which is why the district's the mayor has invested $100 million this year in affordable housing, an additional $18 million in access to mental health, untold amounts in recreation programs for young people, because I was in the juvenile justice system in this district working for now 11 years. And so we know interventions with our young people through recreation, through education, through mental health services and supports, those are all also prevention.
Yes, certainly. Things for young people to do after school and during the summer are very important. But I will close by just noting that 21 Republicans, when it came time to award the Congressional Gold Medal to police officers, Capitol Hill police officers, Washington, D.C. police officers who came to the aid of Capitol Hill police officers on January 6th, and 21 Republicans, including my friend, the chair of this very committee, voted to oppose that, has to be something that causes Detective Pemberton a loss of morale and maybe some decisions to resign. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. You may comment on that if you wish, Mr. Pemberton.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I mean, when we're talking about police response, particularly on that day, I think our members were happy to respond to the call for service.
Thank you so much.
He cut you off. I extended the time for you to answer. Were you able to respond?
I'll just continue, Mr. Chairman. I think that we understand that that's our duty, regardless of whether it's a call for a stolen bicycle or whether there's a giant riot that occurs anywhere in the city. Our members are going to show up, and we're going to make sure that we bring that situation back under control. And we were happy to be there that day, and we were happy to be able to render that situation safe.
And you deserve a gold medal also.
Thank you, Mr. Detective Pemberton. And so I recognize myself for my 5 minutes. And I want to ask Ms. Richards, Mr. Sobolewski, Mr. Jablonski, thank you for being here. Your testimony is invaluable. And I think Mr. Sobolewski, Mr. Jablonski, you kind of addressed interaction with what I would call the victims' rights unit of the D.C. government. And I think that might have worked out. I didn't get a chance to hear, Ms. Richards, were you able to encounter victims' rights units?
No, sir.
No one from the prosecutor's office or social services came through for victims' rights to talk with you?
No.
Okay, but Mr. Sobolewski, Mr. Jablonski?
Yes, that is correct. They reached out to me. They were nice, and it's nice to have them, but it's no compensation for what, you know, what police should be doing, what prosecutors should be doing,
right,
what judges should be doing. There shouldn't need to be this victims' rights unit or whatever it is. It should be elected officials or who's ever in the position of power enforcing laws that are already on the book.
Right. Mr. Jablonski?
Yes, I mean, the lady that reached out to me was very nice, and she offered services for mental health for me and my son, but, you know, when I explained that I was upset with the plea and everything else, she was like, I can listen, but I can't do anything.
Yeah, so I guess that gets to the point here, is it looks like except for in your case, Ms. Richards, you didn't have any interaction, but the real nub of this is the prosecutorial arm. Sounds like it failed our three witnesses here today. Mr. Sobolewski?
I think in part it's on the prosecutor, but it's also on the judges. And while it's, you know, happening here in D.C., it's nationwide, and it's a problem that scares me for, you know, someone who just got married. I want to bring kids into this society, and it scares me that, you know, we have kind of a prosecutorial rot and a judicial rot in our system, and that there needs to be accountability in that.
Thank you. So I'm going to direct the next question to you, Mr. Detective Pemberton. You listed 9 laws passed by the D.C. Council that have an impact on enforcement by the police, and one of those seemed to have included an elimination of qualified immunity. Is that accurate?
Well, I'm happy to say that bill actually was not passed. It was introduced and debated, but thankfully that bill never made it to fruition. But it was included in the list because it goes to the sort of rhetoric that the council was engaged in and how the message that was sent to police officers about how they felt about them doing their jobs.
Right, and that rhetoric, and with the threat of removing qualified immunity, that has a suppressive effect on actual policing. In my experience in talking to officers from many jurisdictions, officers become more cautious because even if you, as you said, even if you follow the procedures, policies, constitution, statutes, you're at personal risk for liability. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think a big misnomer here about qualified immunity is that it applies to criminal charges. It doesn't. Qualified immunity just allows citizens to sue police officers as individuals if it were to be removed. So the suggestion there is that if a police officer were to go out and make a mistake, that a citizen could sue them for their own personal earnings, their savings, their home, their college savings. And that obviously creates a chilling effect on doing productive and proactive police work.
Thank you. Mr. Stimson, I want to ask you a question related to your comments about the OAG and should be eliminated and juvenile cases should be referred to the U.S. District Attorney for D.C. The reason I ask that question is because I'm incredibly dissatisfied with the performance of Mr. Graves, who is the U.S. Attorney for the D.C. Do you trust him if he were given now jurisdiction, or broader jurisdiction over juvenile cases, that he would actually enforce those? Would he prosecute those?
Well, first off, Mr. Chairman, I'm not proposing to eliminate the OAG. They're the city attorney, and they do a good job handling civil and other matters.
But moving
the criminal function into the U.S. attorneys by expanding the Superior Court division and adding a juvenile and traffic section like most city DA offices have. And look, there are good prosecutors in my old office. I'm disgusted at what happened in these 3 cases here. I'm ashamed, actually, of what happened in those cases. That wouldn't happen at a good DA office. Just wouldn't. But sunlight's a good disinfectant. According to your colleague, the ranking member, she's had a very productive conversation with Mr. Graves. He says the declination rate is coming down. I hope that's correct. I look forward to seeing the numbers, which are coming out soon. But the OAG holds on to as many juvenile cases as they can. So I think if you, to offer a solution, do what most big city DA offices do, put the juvenile section in the DA's office, and then exercise oversight over that office in an appropriate way, and change the law so that violent juvenile offenders can be handled in the adult court.
My time has expired. I regret that terribly because there's so much more to talk about with you. But that will conclude our hearing today. We have a submission for the record by Ms. Jackson Lee.
Thank you. I have an article dated March 13, 2023 that indicates cases were dropped because of incorrect information being given to the U.S. Attorney, and it was agreed to by then Police Chief Robert Conte, who indicated that we must have complete and good information to come in for cases to be prosecuted. Then I want to put into the record the response to Mrs. Stimson. There is no mandatory minimum penalty.
You cannot put into record a response, but you can put into the record the actual U.S. code if you'd like.
I will. There is no mandatory minimum penalty for 18 U.S.C. 922G, felon in possession of a firearm. There is one for in possession of a firearm in the committing of a crime. And my statement, I'm going to put that into the record, unanimous consent. I'm just going to mention, not put in the record at this time, Mr. Chairman. I think the record is open.
You can't. You can't mention. You can't filibuster here.
Trust and Integrity Act. Thank you. I yield back. Thank you for your courtesies.
You bet. Those will be admitted without objection.
Thank you. And can I thank the witnesses, as I know you will, and express my deep concern for the victims. And I hope they gained whatever we say here today. I hope you gained that we want to work together to stop violent crime and to stop more victims from accruing. Thank you to the District of Columbia. I yield back.
Thank you. I do thank our witnesses for testifying today, for coming here. I know that it was very difficult. Perhaps I would imagine for our victims who were witnesses. Appreciate your testimony, and also express my deepest regrets that you encountered what you encountered, as well as the time it will take to fully heal from that. And so may God bless you guys to feel his peace. But without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. And without objection, the hearing is adjourned. And before I say that, it's too late now, I already said it, but I also want to get to the record my gratitude to our staff, and I know that the ranking member would extend her gratitude to her staff as well for preparing for this hearing today. With that, we're adjourned.